The Galactic Dominion had ruled the stars for over 1,000 years, expanding its empire through ruthless conquest. No species had ever withstood their might. From the icy moons of the Sarnak to the sprawling cities of the Tarvok, every civilization that had dared resist them had been crushed. Their worlds reduced to lifeless husks, their people forced into servitude. Their doctrine was simple: overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers, break their will before they even had a chance to fight back, and erase any trace of defiance. It was a formula that had worked flawlessly for centuries, and now they had turned their gaze toward a new target: humanity. At first, the Dominion's strategists barely considered humans a threat. Their homeworld, Earth, was a single planet among countless others, and their colonies were scattered, small, and poorly defended compared to the vast holdings of the Dominion. Their warships, while technologically impressive, were few in number. Their fleets lacked the raw firepower of the Dominion Armada. But most importantly, they lacked the one thing the Dominion feared most: unity. The Galactic Dominion had seen humanity's history, their endless conflicts, their fractured alliances, their political divisions. To the Dominion, they were just another species too busy fighting among themselves to mount any meaningful resistance. The invasion plan was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and crush their colonies before humanity had time to react. The first target would be Avalon 4, a newly established human world on the edge of Dominion-controlled space. It was a small but growing colony, home to nearly 300,000 civilians and a handful of military installations. Intelligence reports suggested that its defenses were minimal: just a few orbital stations, outdated planetary shields, and a token fleet presence that would crumble against even a fraction of the Dominion's might. A fleet was assembled. 1,000 warships, each battle-tested and armed with the most advanced weaponry the Dominion had developed over centuries of conquest. It was a force so overwhelming that no species had ever withstood its advance. The Dominion commanders saw this as nothing more than another routine extermination, another species to be conquered, another world to be claimed. They expected an army to greet them. Instead, they found one ship. As the Dominion fleet dropped out of hyperspace, their sensors immediately detected the lone vessel, hanging motionless above Avalon 4 like a silent sentinel. It was sleek and angular, its hull made of some kind of dark alloy that seemed to drink in the starlight rather than reflect it. Unlike the bulky, brute-force designs of Dominion warships, this ship was compact, streamlined, and, unsettlingly, silent. At first, the Dominion commanders dismissed it as a scouting vessel, perhaps the last-ditch effort of a desperate human military. But as their sensors scanned it, unease crept through the ranks. The ship's energy readings were unlike anything they had encountered before, power output far exceeding that of any vessel its size, weapon signatures that didn't match any known human technology, and most disturbing of all, it wasn't moving. It was waiting. A transmission was sent. Unidentified human vessel. This is High Commander Ralzarik of the Dominion Fleet. Your world is now under the protection of the Galactic Dominion. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender immediately, and your people will be spared. No response. Another transmission. Still nothing. Annoyed, the commander ordered a more direct approach. A flight of Dominion interceptors, fast attack craft designed to disable enemy ships, broke formation and accelerated toward the lone vessel. Their weapons locked on, their pilots ready to engage. Then, in an instant, the human ship vanished. It didn't activate a cloaking field. It didn't jump to hyperspace. It simply ceased to be in one place and reappeared in another, this time directly inside the heart of the Dominion formation. The fleet's sensors went haywire. The ship had just moved in a way that defied every law of physics the Dominion understood. One moment it was in front of them. The next it was behind them. Then to their left, then to their right. All without any detectable propulsion. No hyperspace wake. Nothing. Panic rippled through the Dominion fleet. Their weapons struggled to lock onto a target that seemed to exist outside the normal constraints of time and space. Orders were shouted across command decks. Battlecruisers repositioned themselves. Shields were raised. Yet none of it seemed to matter. Then, the ship attacked. Not with traditional weapons. No missiles, no plasma bolts, no laser barrages. Instead, beams of pure energy lanced out from its hull. Silent, precise, and devastatingly lethal. The first Dominion battlecruiser in its path disintegrated in an instant. Its shields flickered for a fraction of a second before failing completely, its hull glowing white-hot before collapsing in on itself, as if space itself had swallowed it whole. Another ship was struck, then another, and another. The human ship moved like a specter, weaving effortlessly between the Dominion warships, appearing and disappearing at will, leaving only destruction in its wake. Entire Dominion squadrons were annihilated before they could even register where the enemy was. Weapons fire from the fleet was utterly useless. Every shot either missed entirely or phased straight through the human ship, as if it wasn't really there at all. High Commander Ral Zarek gripped the edges of his command throne, his mandibles clicking in agitation. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. This was supposed to be an easy victory. This was supposed to be their moment of triumph. Instead, they were the ones being hunted. His mind raced. Was this truly human technology? How had they developed something so advanced? Had they been hiding their strength all along? Or was this something else entirely? More Dominion ships fell, their crews never even having the chance to scream before they were erased from existence. The surviving warships desperately tried to flee, their thrusters burning at maximum, but the human ship was always faster. It gave them no chance to escape. The Dominion fleet, once an unstoppable force of destruction, had been reduced to a graveyard in a matter of minutes. The few remaining ships, crippled and defenseless, drifted aimlessly through the void, their crews too stunned to react. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the human ship went silent once more. It didn't gloat. It didn't demand surrender. It simply waited. The message was clear. This wasn't just a battle. This was a warning. For the first time in their long and bloody history, the Galactic Dominion had encountered something they could not defeat, and humanity had only just begun to fight. High Commander Ral Zarek struggled to process what he had just witnessed. His fleet, 1,000 warships, veterans of countless battles, had been obliterated in mere minutes. Not by an armada, not by a superior force, but by one ship. His mind raced, desperately trying to rationalize it. No species, in recorded history, had demonstrated anything close to this level of technology. Even the most advanced civilizations the Dominion had subjugated had required overwhelming force to break. But this was something else entirely. A hushed silence filled the Dominion command vessel, now one of the last intact warships in the system. Officers stared blankly at flickering control screens, their displays still failing to track the human ship's movements. Tactical readouts showed only chaos. Entire formations had been erased, their signals now nothing more than static. Ral Zarek forced himself to think like a strategist. What was the pattern? What was the weakness? He had faced superior enemy fleets before, had turned desperate battles into victories through sheer tactical brilliance. But how do you fight something that doesn't play by the rules of war? Another officer broke the silence, voice shaking. High Commander, our weapons, he hesitated. They phased through it, like it wasn't there. Ral Zarek already knew this. He had seen it with his own eyes. Dominion firepower, capable of shattering moons, had been meaningless against the human ship. He clenched his mandibles in frustration. It is there, he growled. It's not an illusion. Our ships are being destroyed. But how? Another officer, one of his lead scientists, spoke up. His voice was barely above a whisper. Commander, I think we are looking at a vessel that does not operate in the same reality as us. Ral Zarek turned sharply toward him, his slitted eyes narrowing. Explain. The scientist swallowed. We have always viewed space combat within the framework of known physics. Ships move through three-dimensional space, fire weapons with measurable energy signatures, and engage in battle based on predictable rules of motion and force. He gestured toward the flickering data streams on the control panels. But this ship, it doesn't follow those rules. It appears where it shouldn't. It moves without propulsion. It absorbs all energy fired at it. It reacts before we attack. Ral Zarek exhaled slowly, beginning to understand the horror of the situation. You're saying it exists outside our perception? The scientist hesitated. Not entirely. It exists here, but also somewhere else, as if it is partially phased into another dimension, a place where the normal constraints of space and time don't apply. That would explain why it moves instantaneously, why our sensors struggle to track it, why our weapons don't affect it. Ralzarek's mind reeled. If this was true, then they weren't just fighting a superior warship. They were fighting something that had transcended the very fabric of reality. A deep, creeping fear settled over the bridge. The Dominion had prided itself on its dominance over the known galaxy, on its ability to crush any enemy through superior strategy, numbers, and firepower. But what do you do when none of that matters? Ralzarek knew he had only one option left. Survive. Order the fleet to fall back, he barked. Get us out of this system, now. His second-in-command hesitated. But High Commander, Ralzarek's mandibles clicked in frustration. We need to retreat and regroup. We must report this to the Dominion High Council. If this is the true power of humanity, then we need to understand it before we can fight it. But even as he spoke the words, he knew the truth. There would be no fighting this. At best, the Dominion could avoid it. At worst, it meant the end of everything they had built. Yet even as his remaining ships powered up their engines, a chilling realization struck him. The human ship wasn't letting them go. It had been waiting, watching, and now it moved again. The silent executioner a flicker, a whisper of darkness. The ship reappeared directly in the Dominion's escape path, blocking the entire fleet's retreat. Panic erupted across the command channels. Crews scrambled to adjust course, desperately trying to maneuver around it. But there was nowhere to go. No hyperspace lane that wouldn't take them straight through the thing that had just obliterated the rest of their fleet. Ralzarek felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Powerlessness. Then, the human ship sent a transmission. For the first time since the battle began, their communications channels crackled to life. But it wasn't a demand for surrender. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A single, calm voice echoed through the bridge. It was distorted, unnatural, almost too human to be real. Leave. Now. There will be no second warning. Ralzarek's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't gloating. It wasn't enraged. It didn't even sound like it cared. This wasn't a species fighting for survival. This was a species that had already won. A species that had moved beyond the concept of war as the Dominion understood it, and that made them the most terrifying enemy of all. Ralzarek made his decision. Pride be damned. All remaining vessels. Full retreat. A desperate gamble. If the human ship wanted to stop them, it could. There was no question about that now, but for some reason, it hadn't destroyed them yet. He could only pray that it meant they would be allowed to leave. Engines roared. The Dominion warships twisted their vectors, recalibrating for a blind jump to anywhere but here. It was risky. Exiting a system without precise calculations could land them in the heart of a star, but at this point, anything was preferable to facing that ship again. Time stretched into eternity. The ship remained still, its dark form looming over them like a god watching mortals flee from its presence. Then, finally, hyperspace drives activated. The remnants of the once mighty Dominion fleet vanished, leaving behind only wreckage, fire, and silence. The beginning of the end on. The bridge of the last Dominion command ship, Ralzarek slumped into his seat. The retreat had worked. They were alive. But there was no victory here. Only one truth remained in his mind. This was no mere military setback. This was a prophecy. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. They had crushed world after world, shaping the stars in their image. But now they had glimpsed what lay beyond their empire, beyond their understanding, and it had stared back. Ralzarek closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer to whatever god still listened. Because for the first time in Dominion history, they weren't the apex predator anymore, and humanity was only getting started. The Dominion fleet, or what remained of it, hurtled through hyperspace in silence. No celebrations, no battle reports, just the quiet hum of emergency systems working to keep crippled ships functional. The command bridge of High Commander Ralzarek's vessel was eerily still. its officers too shaken to speak. They had faced annihilation, and only by some unseen mercy had they been allowed to flee. But why? Ralzarek's thoughts raced. The human ship could have wiped them out, should have wiped them out. Yet it let them go. Not out of fear. Not because the battle was difficult. It had let them go as a choice. The implications were horrifying. The Dominion had never been in control. Not for a second. The unnatural ship. The data pouring in from the battle was difficult to analyze. Most sensor logs were corrupted beyond recognition, unable to reconcile the impossible physics they had just witnessed. But the fragments they could recover told a chilling story. It wasn't just that the human ship had superior weaponry or shielding. It defied reality itself. Every calculation of its velocity showed inconsistencies. Sometimes it was moving at speeds faster than light without any observable acceleration. At other times, it seemed completely motionless, even while it was clearly attacking. And its existence itself was an enigma. Every scan returned conflicting data. Some indicated solid matter. Others suggested it was partially immaterial, as if it phased in and out of their dimension. Even its shape was incomprehensible. From one angle, it appeared as a sleek, blade-like vessel, bristling with unknown weaponry. From another, it seemed to be a shifting mass of dark geometry, warping as if it wasn't truly bound by three-dimensional space. Some logs even showed it appearing in multiple places at once. Ralzarek had fought countless wars, conquered entire civilizations. He had seen planetary sieges, mass starship battles, and weapons that could erase entire moons, but never had he encountered something that defied the fundamental laws of existence. This was beyond technology. This was something else, something terrifying. A message from the void. Then the ship's long-range communications array flickered to life. It was an encrypted Dominion signal, high priority, originating from the Dominion High Council itself. The transmission was urgent, overriding all standard protocols. High Commander Ralzarek. The voice on the other end was cold, authoritative, one of the High Lords. We have received your distress signal. Explain why an entire armada was lost in what should have been a routine conquest. Ralzarek clenched his mandibles. He had been preparing for this. But how could he explain what had happened? How could he describe something that should not exist? The system was not unguarded, he said carefully. We encountered resistance, an unknown human warship. One ship destroyed an entire Dominion armada. The High Lord's voice carried undisguised skepticism. Yes. A long silence. Then, elaborate. Ralzarek's claws tightened, against the armrest of his command chair. He chose his next words carefully. It did not behave like any warship we have encountered. It was something beyond our understanding. Our weapons were useless against it. It moved in ways that defy logic. We never even had a chance to fight back. Another pause. Then, another voice joined the transmission. A voice Ralzarek recognized immediately. The supreme strategist of the Dominion. Tell me, the strategist's voice was disturbingly calm. Was there any communication from this ship? Ralzarek hesitated, then nodded. Yes. After it had destroyed nearly our entire fleet, it sent one message. Leave. Now. There will be no second warning. Silence. Then, the strategist exhaled slowly. I feared this day would come, he murmured. Ralzarek's blood ran cold. You knew, I suspected, the strategist admitted. Though I prayed I was wrong. The lost war Ralzarek had never felt true fear before. He had always believed in the Dominion's power, its unshakable might. But now, his own leaders were speaking as if humanity had always been a threat they could not fight. Supreme Strategist, he growled. If you knew, then why did you send us to our deaths? The strategist sighed. Because some battles must be lost for the truth to be understood. Ralzarek's mandibles clicked in frustration. What truth? The strategist's voice dropped to a whisper. That we are not the masters of this galaxy. The High Commander felt his entire body tense. The Dominion has ruled unchallenged for centuries, the strategist continued. We believed ourselves to be invincible. But there are things in the void that do not fear us. Humanity is one of them. Ralzarek leaned forward. Then why have they not destroyed us? That is the question, isn't it? The strategist's voice was grim. Humanity has never sought galactic conquest. They did not expand as we did, nor did they build fleets to challenge us. We assumed that made them weak. We were wrong. Ralzarek's thoughts raced. If they are so powerful, why remain hidden? Why now? The strategist hesitated. Because until now, we were not a threat worth their attention. The warning Ralzarek's claws dug into his seat. And now? Now. The strategist sighed. Now, we may have forced them to act. The High Commander felt something cold settle in his chest. What are our orders? Another pause. Then the strategist spoke with finality. You are to return to Dominion space immediately. Do not engage humanity further. Do not provoke them. From this point forward, we do not acknowledge their existence. Ralzarek frowned. You want us to ignore them? No, the strategist said softly. I want us to pray they ignore us. The transmission cut off. The fear of the unknown Ralzarek slumped back, exhaling shakily. His officers, who had listened in stunned silence, looked to him for guidance. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion did not fear, and yet here they were, fleeing from an enemy that had barely lifted a finger against them. He turned toward his second-in-command. Send a message to all remaining ships. We are returning. Home. His officer hesitated. And what do we tell our people? Ralzarek didn't answer immediately. His mind replayed the battle. How swiftly they had been erased. How utterly insignificant their might had been in the face of the human warship. Then, finally, he spoke. We tell them nothing. Because for the first time in his life, High Commander Ralzarek understood the truth. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, but humanity had mastered something far greater. And if they had chosen to remain in the shadows until now, then, perhaps it was better that way. The fleet limped through the vast emptiness of hyperspace, its once proud warships now little more than battered husks. What had begun as a routine invasion, an assured victory against an inferior species, had become something far worse. A reckoning. High Commander Ralzarek stood motionless at the center of his bridge, staring into the endless void beyond, the reinforced viewport. The glow of hyperspace tunnels washed over his exoskeletal frame, but his thoughts were consumed by something far darker than the abyss before him. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that did not conquer. An enemy that did not demand surrender. An enemy that had allowed them to live, not out of mercy, but as a warning. And the High Council's response? Silence. The Supreme Strategist's words echoed in Ralzarek's mind. Now, we may have forced them to act. The implications were terrifying. Had the Dominion awakened something that should have been left alone? For centuries, their empire had believed itself supreme. Their war fleets had burned entire civilizations to the ground. Species that resisted were exterminated. Those that surrendered were enslaved. This was the way of things. So why had humanity been different? The unwritten history of humanity. Ralzarek turned toward his intelligence officer, a wiry, sharp-eyed officer named Vek Loran. Unlike the rest of the bridge crew, who remained silent, shaken, Vek Loran was furiously analyzing every available scrap of data. His thin fingers danced across holographic displays, compiling reports, cross-referencing ancient records, searching for something, anything, to explain what they had just faced. Sir, he finally spoke, breaking the eerie quiet. I have reviewed all available intelligence on humanity. There are inconsistencies. Ralzarek narrowed his eyes. Explain. Vek Loran hesitated before continuing. The Dominion first encountered humanity centuries ago. Small, outposts, minor colonies, nothing of consequence. Their technology was primitive, their expansion slow. We assumed they lacked ambition, that they were weak. Ralzarek's mandibles clicked together impatiently. That is what we were taught. Get to the point. Vek Loran exhaled sharply. What if we were wrong? Ralzarek's grip tightened on the armrest of his command chair. Vecloran gestured toward the display, bringing up historical records. Officially, humanity never engaged in large-scale interstellar war. They lacked the fleets, the resources. Their homeworld, Earth, should have been a prime target for conquest long ago. But the Dominion never invaded. Ral Zarek frowned. The High Council deemed them unworthy of our attention. Did they? Vecloran asked, his voice laced with doubt. Or did they know something we did not? Ral Zarek felt a cold weight settle in his chest. What are you suggesting? Vecloran's mandibles twitched. Sir, there are missing records, large gaps in Dominion intelligence regarding humanity. Entire sectors of our archives have been erased or classified beyond even our highest clearance. Ral Zarek stiffened. By whom? I don't know, Vecloran admitted. But it means one thing. Someone within the Dominion does not want us to know the truth about humanity. The silent Warral Zarek's claws dug into his armrest. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted was terrifying. The Dominion should have crushed humanity long ago. They had the strength, the numbers, the technology, but they never did. Not because humanity was weak, but because someone, somewhere, feared what might happen if they did. Ral Zarek turned to his tactical officer. What do we know of humanity's military conflicts? The officer hesitated, then pulled up a holographic timeline. Limited. Their history is fragmented. What we do have suggests they were once extremely violent, engaging in centuries of war among their own species before achieving interstellar travel. Ral Zarek's mandibles clicked. And yet, they never expanded aggressively beyond their own solar system. The officer nodded. Correct. However, his voice wavered. There is something disturbing. Ral Zarek motioned for him to continue. The officer took a deep breath. There are no known records of humanity losing a war. Silence fell over the bridge. Ral Zarek's claws flexed. That's impossible. Every species experiences defeat. The officer's throat clicked in discomfort. Not humanity. Every major war in their history, no matter the odds, no matter the enemy, they either won or they ended the war on their own terms. Ral Zarek felt something dark settle in his mind. This species, this so-called weak race, had never lost a war, and now they had revealed themselves in the most terrifying way possible. The first and final warning. A sudden chime echoed through the bridge. An incoming transmission. Not from Dominion space. Not from the High Council. From the very system they had just fled. Every officer in the room froze. The Dominion had cut all transmissions upon retreat. No signals should have followed them. No messages should have been able to reach them. Yet, here it was. Ral Zarek gestured sharply. Put it through. The holographic display flickered. Static, distortion, and then a human figure. Unlike any Dominion officer, the human did not wear elaborate armor or ceremonial garb. No medals, no insignia of rank. Just simple black clothing, unmarked and featureless. His expression was unreadable, his voice calm. High Commander Ral Zarek. The High Commander's breath hitched. They knew his name. You were permitted to leave, the human continued. Your fleet was spared. Ral Zarek felt every eye on him, but he did not flinch. Why? The human's expression remained neutral. Because we wanted you to understand. A deep silence filled the bridge. Ral Zarek's mandibles clicked. Understand what? The human's gaze was piercing. That we do not seek war. A pause. But if war comes to us, we do not lose. The message was clear. The Dominion had been given a single chance to walk away. Ral Zarek swallowed hard. And if we don't? The human leaned forward slightly, his eyes colder than the void itself. Then you will understand why your archives have missing records. Ral Zarek's blood ran cold. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. No one moved. Finally, the High Commander exhaled slowly. His claws unclenched from the armrest. He turned to his officers, voice heavy with something they had never expected to hear from him. Prepare a full report to the High Council. His second-in-command hesitated. What do we tell them? Ral Zarek turned toward the viewport, staring into the void. Tell them, he said softly, that the Dominion is no longer alone in this galaxy. The bridge remained silent, as the battered fleet continued its retreat, but Ralzarek knew the truth. They had not escaped. They had merely been allowed to leave. For the first time in his long and decorated career, High Commander Ralzarek felt something unfamiliar. Dread. The Dominion had ruled for centuries, crushing opposition without hesitation. No enemy had ever been strong enough to force a retreat, let alone one single ship. Yet here he was, standing in the silence of his command bridge, his fleet scattered and broken, his authority shaken to its very core. And now, there was something worse. The message. A simple, clear warning from a species they had dismissed as weak. A warning that suggested the Dominion had only glimpsed a fraction of humanity's true strength. And the most terrifying part, the missing records. The hidden truth about humanity. Ralzarek's intelligence officer, Vekloran, was working tirelessly, scouring the Dominion's historical archives. He had always trusted Dominion intelligence to be absolute, to contain the full truth of the galaxy. But now, he was beginning to doubt. The more he searched, the more he realized something had been erased. Not by accident, deliberately. Sir, Vekloran finally spoke, his voice tight with unease. I believe I have found something. Ralzarek turned, his mandibles clicking softly. Explain. Vekloran hesitated, as if weighing whether to even say the words aloud. There are references to humanity, fleeting mentions in Dominion war councils dating back over 1,000 cycles. But every time the topic arises, the records become vague. Ralzarek narrowed his eyes. Vague how? Vekloran exhaled sharply. There are entire classified sectors within our own database that even we cannot access. Redacted files, records that have been sealed under Supreme Council authority. It's as if the Dominion itself has hidden something about humanity. The High Commander's claws flexed against the armrest. And what little remains? Vekloran's mandibles twitched. There's mention of a campaign, an unrecorded war, not between humans and the Dominion, but between humanity and another species. A species far older than us. A species that no longer exists. A cold silence filled the room. Ralzarek's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you saying humanity wiped out an entire race? Vekloran nodded grimly. And not just any race. One of the ancients. The war that never happened. Ralzarek paced slowly, his mind racing. The ancients were the firstborn civilizations of the galaxy, the ones who had risen before the Dominion even existed. Most had vanished long ago, their empires crumbling under the weight of time. But some had persisted. Some had wielded power that the Dominion had never dared to challenge. And yet, if Vekloran's findings were true, one of them had fallen to humanity. Which species? Ralzarek demanded. Vekloran hesitated. There is no name, just fragments. Some scholars have referred to them as the Varun. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems. Their fleets were unmatched. The Dominion itself once feared them. And now they are gone, Ralzarek murmured. Vekloran nodded. Yes, sir. But here's the problem. There is no official record of their destruction. There is no final battle, no documented war. They simply disappeared. Ralzarek felt the weight of the revelation press down on him. Had humanity done this? Had an upstart species, dismissed as primitive, erased one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy? And if they had, how? The fear of the unknown. Ralzarek turned toward his tactical officer. Pull up all known records of human military capabilities. The officer obeyed, bringing up holographic displays. What we do know is limited. Their official fleet is relatively small, nothing compared to the Dominion Armada. But their ships, they don't follow conventional design patterns. Ralzarek studied the holograms. Human ships lacked the brutalist efficiency of Dominion. Warcraft. They weren't sleek like the imperial fleets of the Valisari, nor were they towering dreadnoughts like the Croton warcruisers. Instead, human ships were different. Their designs were erratic, sometimes asymmetrical, sometimes blocky, often unconventional. They weren't optimized for sheer firepower, nor did they seem designed for traditional warfare. And yet, one had just obliterated a Dominion. Invasion force. Ralzarek's claws tightened. What is their strongest known weapon? The tactical officer hesitated. That is uncertain. Humanity does not reveal its full arsenal. But what we do know suggests that they favor kinetic weaponry, mass drivers, railguns, projectiles moving at unimaginable speeds. Unlike our plasma-based weapons which burn through armor, human weapons rely on raw force. Ralzarek frowned. That makes no sense. Plasma is more efficient. Energy-based weaponry is the future of war, Vekloran interjected, his voice heavy with realization. Sir, what if they don't care about efficiency? Ralzarek turned toward him. Explain. Vekloran's mandibles twitched. The Dominion has always sought to optimize war. Our ships are designed for endurance. Our weapons are refined for precision. Our fleets rely on calculated strategy. He gestured to the human schematics. But humanity does not fight with efficiency. They fight with finality. Ralzarek felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. They don't build weapons to win battles. They build weapons to end wars. A legacy of war. The High Commander exhaled sharply, turning back to the silent void beyond the viewport. The more they learned, the worse it became. Humanity was not new to war. They were not an upstart race fumbling for their place among the stars. They were something else, something old, something hidden. They had fought wars that had never been recorded, enemies that had never been named, and they had won. Always. Ralzarek understood now. The missing records, the erased archives. The Dominion had known all along, not the war councils, not the military strategists, but the ones at the top, the Supreme Council. They had known what humanity was, and for centuries they had done everything in their power to keep that truth buried. Because if the galaxy ever found out, everything would change. Ralzarek's voice was quiet but firm. We need to return to the core worlds. Immediately. Vekloran hesitated. Sir, if we report this to the Supreme Council. They already know, Ralzarek interrupted, and I intend to find out why. The bridge crew scrambled into action. The battered fleet adjusted course, engines flaring as they prepared for the long journey back to Dominion space. But in his heart, Ralzarek knew something had shifted. They had invaded humanity's territory. They had lost, and worse. Humanity had let them go. The Dominion fleet moved through the silent void of space, a broken shadow of what had once been an armada of conquest. But no one on board felt relief at their escape, because the true horror had just begun to unravel. High Commander Ralzarek stood in the dimly lit command chamber, his mind churning through the impossible truths he had just learned. The Dominion had hidden the reality of humanity. The Varun, an ancient and powerful empire, had vanished, erased from existence by an enemy that history had conveniently forgotten. And now, he was beginning to understand why. The secret buried in history. Ralzarek turned toward Vekloran, his intelligence officer. We need to access the sealed archives. Vekloran hesitated. Sir, those files are protected by the highest level of Dominion encryption. Attempting to bypass them would be considered an act of treason. Ralzarek fixed him with a hard stare. Treason. If what we suspect is true, then treason was committed long before this moment. We have been sent to die, against an enemy the Supreme Council knew we could not defeat. The intelligence officer swallowed hard, but nodded. With shaking hands, he activated a secured data interface, bypassing layers of Dominion security protocols. The process was risky, but Ralzarek knew that if the Supreme Council had truly hidden something, then they had betrayed the entire Dominion. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the chamber. The files had unlocked. Vekloran's mandibles twitched as he read the first recovered document. Sir, you need to see this. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing fragmented footage from centuries ago. Grainy, corrupted, but unmistakable. A battlefield. Not in space, but on a planet. A world scorched beyond recognition. And then, figures began to appear. Not Dominion warriors, Not Varun soldiers, humans, thousands of them, clad in brutal, unyielding armor, standing amidst a landscape of devastation. But it wasn't just their presence that sent a chill through Ralzarek's exoskeleton. It was what they were doing. They weren't celebrating. They weren't claiming victory. They were burying something. The technology that shouldn't exist. Ralzarek's voice was barely above a whisper. What are they doing? Vekloran scrolled through the decrypted text. This planet. It was the last stronghold of the Varun. They were entrenched here, prepared for a final stand against humanity. And yet, the battle lasted only a single planetary rotation. Ralzarek frowned. That's not possible. The Varun were technologically superior in every known way. Vekloran's voice was grim. Then tell me why there are no Varun bodies in this footage. Ralzarek's breath caught. The battlefield was filled with craters, ruined war machines, and shattered structures. But there were no corpses. Not one. As if an entire species had been erased, without a trace. The feed continued, showing human, engineers and soldiers working together to bury something massive beneath the surface of the desolate world. And then, the screen flickered. A line of text, barely legible, appeared in an ancient Dominion dialect. This world is sealed. The weapon must never be found again. Let them forget. Let them never know. A heavy silence fell over the command chamber. Ralzarek's mind raced. A weapon. Something so devastating that humanity, victors of an unrecorded war, had not even claimed the world for themselves. Instead, they had buried it, erased all records of what had happened, and made sure no one would ever find. Out. The Dominion's greatest lie. Ralzarek exhaled slowly. How much more have they hidden? Vekloran continued scanning the files. Sir, I don't think this was the first time. Ralzarek's eyes narrowed. Explain. Vekloran gestured to a secondary data stream. There are other files. Older ones. Not just about the Varun. There are scattered references to other species that no longer exist. Species that weren't just conquered, but deleted from history. Ralzarek felt his mandibles tighten. Humans didn't just fight wars. Vekloran continued. They fought final wars. They didn't seek territory or tribute or political leverage. They fought so that their enemies would never rise again. The High Commander's claws dug into the console. The realization was horrifying. The Dominion had long prided itself on being the supreme force of the galaxy, a civilization that had crushed resistance and established its rule over countless worlds. But in all those centuries, they had never fought an enemy like this. An enemy that didn't just win wars, an enemy that ended them. The decision that would change everything. The weight of the discovery settled over Ralzarek like a suffocating void. The Supreme Council had known. That much was clear. They had hidden the truth, locked away the records, and ensured that no one ever questioned humanity's place in the galaxy. Because to acknowledge the truth would be to acknowledge fear. A fear so great that even the Dominion, rulers of the stars, had chosen ignorance over confrontation. Ralzarek had always believed the Dominion was destined to rule all sentient life, that no species could ever stand in their way. But now, he saw things differently. They had provoked humanity. They had sent an invasion fleet, expecting an easy conquest, and in response, humanity had sent one ship. Just one. And that had been enough to shatter their illusions of dominance. A reckoning approaches. Ralzarek took a slow, measured breath. We are returning to Dominion space. Vekloran hesitated. Sir, do we inform the Supreme Council? The High Commander's gaze was unreadable. Not yet. Vekloran frowned. Sir, if the Council learns that we accessed these records, they may consider it treason. Ralzarek nodded. They might. But if they already know the truth, then they are either fools or cowards. And if they do not know, then we have far greater problems. The intelligence officer swallowed hard, but said nothing. Ralzarek turned toward the viewport, watching the cold abyss of space stretch endlessly before them. The Supreme Council had a choice to make. But deep down, he already knew the answer. They would not accept this truth. They would not stop their war. And humanity. Humanity would not forgive them for what had been done. The war was not over. It was only beginning. The Dominion fleet drifted in silence as High Commander Ral Zarek stood before the vast expanse of space, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The truth he had uncovered was more than a revelation. It was a catastrophe. Everything the Dominion had built, the unshakable belief in their supremacy, was based on a lie. Humanity was not some forgotten species that had survived by luck or isolation. They were something else entirely, something ancient, something terrifying. But the worst realization the Supreme Council had known, a war that was never meant to be. One Ral Zarek turned to his officers. They were all silent, their expressions unreadable. They had all seen the classified footage. They had all read the archived records. The Varun had not been defeated. They had been erased, and the Dominion had been sent to repeat their mistake. Vec Loran's mandibles twitched as he scrolled through another recovered data file. Sir, these records go even further back than we thought. The Supreme Council didn't just hide the truth about humanity. They built their empire around it. Ral Zarek's spines flared. Explain. Vec Loran hesitated before speaking. According to these files, the Dominion's earliest conquests weren't about expansion. They were about containment. Whole civilizations were absorbed, not for their resources, not for their technology, but to keep them from finding something. Ral Zarek frowned. Finding what? The intelligence officer hesitated, then brought up another projection. The grainy image displayed a set of coordinates, deep within Dominion territory, a place no species had been allowed to enter, a place known only as the Black Sector. Vec Loran's voice was hollow. Sir, these coordinates. This is where the first Dominion warships were sent to investigate humanity. This is where the Supreme Council ordered all records sealed. Ral Zarek felt his pulse slow. It all made sense now. The Dominion's strength had never been about conquest. It had been about desperation. The Supreme Council hadn't expanded because they were unstoppable. They had expanded because they were terrified. The warning buried in the stars. Another file flickered onto the holographic display, a distress signal. Old, nearly corrupted beyond repair. A voice crackled through the speakers, its language ancient but still recognizable. It was Varun. To any who find this, do not seek them. Do not provoke them. We did not listen. We did not understand until it was too late. We begged for surrender. We offered everything, but they do not wage war for power. They do not conquer for resources. They end threats. And once they deem you a threat, there is no negotiation. There is no escape. If you have heard this message, it is already too late. The void is watching. And it remembers. The transmission cut out. Silence filled the command chamber. Ral Zarek's claws tightened into a fist. The Varun had thought they were the pinnacle of galactic power, right up until they weren't, and now the Dominion had followed the same path. History was repeating itself, and humanity? Humanity hadn't just responded with one warship. They had sent one warship to observe. The unseen enemy Ral Zarek turned back to the viewport. The human vessel was no longer in pursuit, but that didn't mean they were safe. If even half of what they had learned was true, then that ship had been a test, a warning, and if the Supreme Council ignored it, then the Dominion would suffer the same fate as the Varun. A deep, quiet rage filled him. The Supreme Council had lied. They had doomed their own people, sent thousands to die for nothing. Ral Zarek's spines twitched as he made his decision. Set course for the homeworld. The bridge officers hesitated. Sir? Vec Loran asked carefully. Ral Zarek's voice was cold steel. If the Supreme Council knew about this, and still chose war, then they are unfit to rule. We return, not as their servants, but as their executioners. The officers exchanged glances. They knew what this meant. Rebellion. But what choice did they have? The Supreme Council had doomed them all. If they remained loyal, they would be sending their people to slaughter. Ral Zarek stepped forward, staring into the abyss of space. The stars were older than any empire, and in them lay the true history of the galaxy. For too long, the Dominion had been blind. Now they would see. The galaxy will burn far beyond the Dominion's fleet. In the cold darkness of space, the lone, human warship remained motionless. It had not followed. It had not fired. It had only watched. And deep within the black void, countless other ships lay hidden, waiting in the silence. Humanity had been underestimated once before. It would not happen again. The Dominion believed they ruled the stars. But the stars belonged to humanity, and soon the galaxy would remember.